From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, we're here at the Library of Congress, and we'll be talking with Yvette Landry and Richard Comeau and Bo Thomas, who are Cajun and honky-tonk musicians from Louisiana. My name is Steve Winnick, and I'm with the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. So let's start out by talking about a little bit of what's been in the news lately. You guys are from Breaux Bridge, I understand?
We are.
How's it doing after the floods?
It's been 3.5 weeks and we still have some water there. It's gone down a little bit, but it was pretty bad. I have to say, it was pretty bad.
Are people managing to cope, or has there been a lot of evacuations there?
No, people are managing to cope. It kind of speaks to our culture. We don't really wait for anybody to come in and help us. We just sort of do for ourselves.
Right.
And where we live, everybody has a boat. Everybody has an SUV. Everybody's got something. So when the rain started and the water started coming up, people evacuated immediately. We had neighbor helping neighbor kind of thing. And the cleanup's been taking a while. Some areas still have some water and they can't get in there yet.
Right.
But it's slowly getting back to normal. But
All right.
yeah.
Well, the rest of the country is pulling for you and wishing for a
Thank you.
speedy recovery from all of that.
Talking about boats, never seen this ever. We have a drawbridge that crosses Bayou Teche. The water was so high that a guy got in his canoe and paddled across the drawbridge.
Over the bridge.
Over the bridge.
Wow.
Over the
Never
bridge.
seen that, ever,
There's
ever.
about 2 feet
May never
of
see
water.
that again.
Wow.
You know?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So in that area, is it mostly French culture? Were you growing up essentially bilingual? Or?
I'd say we bilingual. The roots are Cajun.
Right.
Cajun, Acadians is what we're labeled as, exiled years ago from Nova Scotia down to South Louisiana. And yes, we're Acadians, and Cajuns is what we call ourselves short, but we are bilingual. We all been educated, whatever, we can speak English.
Right. Well, my question was more along the lines of whether all of you also spoke French, because not everybody in Louisiana does.
And I'll speak to that because Richard grew up, he speaks French fluently. I do not.
Okay.
I was the first in my family and my brother to not speak French. And part of that comes from when my parents were growing up, it was frowned upon to speak French in school. So they got punished for speaking French in school. So they would only speak French at home and they didn't teach us. And we were not taught French in school. So some of my generation, like Richard and others, did pick up the language.
But it was not until after school.
Right.
After
Do it in
high school, I learned in little community Henderson, right out of Breaux Bridge.
Right.
Most people, that's all they spoke, so I had to kind of just pick it up.
Right.
And so was it true for all of you that in school French was kind of discouraged?
It was not taught in
They
school
wouldn't
at
taught
all.
it.
It was
I learned
not.
it in the university and through traveling and learned it through the music of my culture. That's how I learned to speak and to write a little bit of French, but it was not.
My grandparents spoke French fluently, and my parents spoke French fluently, and they would speak to each other in French when they didn't want us
To know what was going on.
Right.
And that's how that went.
So it became the secret language, and
Right.
then of course you
Right.
couldn't know it,
Exactly.
right? So,
Exactly.
yeah. So what was the music culture like when you were growing up?
It's probably different for each
Different
one
for
of
each
us.
one of
Yeah,
us, you know.
for sure.
My grandparents were musicians, and they played sort of swing and what do you call it?
Dixieland.
Dixieland, kind of Dixieland music. So I heard a lot of that growing up. Not necessarily them because they had stopped playing by the time I came around, but recordings and country music. That's what my family listened to. We didn't really listen to Cajun music. Richard has a different.
And my influences were strictly Cajun music. My father was a Cajun musician. Back then, lap steel, no pedals. Pedals weren't even invented yet. He played just a 6-string lap steel with Cajun music, and that's what I grew up listening to. That's where I began.
And Bo?
I don't know where I come from. No one in my family for ages, generations, I could not trace anyone back that played any musical instruments. But I grew up, my family loved Cajun music and our culture. My family owns a Cajun food and spice manufacturing company. So we certainly knew the culture and music, but I didn't grow up with it.
Mhm.
I had some of the greatest Cajun musicians playing at a restaurant in my backyard, and until I started playing Cajun music 12 years ago,
Never knew that.
I didn't even know who they were. You know, Dewey Balfa and Okta Clark and all these guys played at a little restaurant called Mulots in Brobridge, and
Rufus Thibodeau.
Rufus Thibodeau was in
I've
there.
been to Mulan. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
And I didn't even know who they were, or the you know, other than there was some music going on in the background, but food was really good.
Right. But you did hear them.
But I did hear
So
them.
it
Yeah,
influenced you a little bit. Yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure. So that was certainly one of the contexts in which you'd see music. There was restaurants and dance halls and that kind of
Right,
thing.
and we used to go to some things called, I remember the first time that I really took note of it was at a boucherie.
Mhm.
And that's where you slaughter the pig and then all this stuff is made. And it was probably close to your house growing up. Past the store, right by the overpass.
Oh, by Ellis Trust.
But it was Mr. Elstrom's place.
That's
yeah.
where I learned to play the steel guitar, at his
Exactly.
camp, matter of fact.
And I actually have a picture of me. I'm probably about 9 or 10 years old, holding an accordion. I've got a little skipper hat on, and doing this. But I remember people would just break out instruments. Everybody, and you just start this jam right there. And so not only on the radio or at the restaurants, but it was pretty. I mean, common to go to somebody's house and somebody just started playing music.
Right. So what was your first instrument? Was it the accordion, or did you start?
No, my first instrument was the piano when I was 3.
That's a good starting place, isn't
Yep,
it?
I started with piano when I was 3, and then when I was in the 4th grade, I started playing the clarinet, and through high school, I ended up playing up all of woodwind instruments. And after high school, I closed the piano, closed all the other instruments, and said, I hate this, I don't like music, I'm never doing it again. Done.
Good luck with that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And then 12 years ago, I ended up going in a totally different direction, and I bought a bass guitar.
Mhm.
And I was just gonna buy it to, my dad had cancer, and so I was just sort of a therapy instrument to do.
Sure.
I was just gonna play it at home, and somebody said, well, there's a jam at this little store down Gloria Switch, and I ended up going to that jam, and here I am the rest.
So you started with bass.
Started with bass, and then I went to accordion, and then when I first experienced that first jam session, it was in an old house which they had converted into a store, and I opened the door, and there was this back room, probably about the size of this stage, and they had maybe 90 people in there, from the age of 2 to 92, all just playing music, and I just went, oh wow, what is this? I had never experienced anything like that. So I started going, and then I got all excited, and I just wanted to learn every instrument. So I told my mom, I said, I want to try and learn accordion. So she said, oh, I think Miss Lois's brother might have an accordion. So she called a friend of a friend and got that. And then I remember seeing a fiddle on the wall in my mom's house, and I said, what's that fiddle? She said, well, that's your great-grandfather's fiddle. And I said, can I take that off the wall and maybe try to do that? So, I got that, and then a friend of mine had a guitar. So I started learning all of them at once, but I stuck more with the accordion, so I was doing bass and accordion.
Mhm.
And I tried fiddle. Not so much.
Well-
Not so much.
Well, luckily you have
But
both.
luckily I have both, yeah.
So tell us about your how you started with the fiddle.
Wow, I kind of out of nowhere, my family had this spice company, and we were doing a cochon de lait, roasting a little baby suckling pig for the Super Bowl halftime show in New
Excellent.
Orleans. And there was Dan Rather and all these big guys walking around in $5,000 and $10,000 suits and a piece of pig in their hand, with a little grease dripping down their chin. So my dad said, hey boy, like the year before, if I get you a Cajun accordion, would you learn 1 or 2 songs and sit on the by the pig and play the accordion? I'm like, sit by a pig and play an accordion? No, I don't know about that. And some little guy was with my sister and said, hey Mom, I bet you couldn't play a fiddle. I'm like, oh, I bet you I could. Well, anyway, I begged my dad. 3 months later, he finally bought me this fiddle out of nowhere. And I took it home. Within just a few hours, I came down playing 4 or 5 songs that I had learned. And 5.5 months later, went on my first tour halfway around the world and started playing. It was 27 years ago and never looked back.
All right. So fiddle was really your first instrument?
I think, so, yeah. I mean, I played trumpet a little bit in high school and drums in a very small band, but terrible.
I remember playing with him about that time, and it's like he came out of the womb with the fiddle. He played that good back then.
I started when
He's
I was
amazing
17
now,
and a
but
half.
he was really, really accomplished even back then.
I
Amazing.
didn't play as a kid. I
We still
started
talk about
17.
that back home, how he just like came out the womb playing the fiddle, you know? Really.
Amazing. And so you said that your first sort of influence was
my father.
lap steel. Yeah.
Yeah, my father played Cajun steel, but my very first instrument was an acoustic guitar at 4, and just learned, and I had just a musically family on my dad's side. Every family reunion, I couldn't wait because I'd learned something different, you know, because I had my cousins as mentors, and they'd show me how to put my hands, and then the ear kind of took over, and then got home from school, 13 years old, walked into my bedroom, and brand new pedal steel guitar at the foot of my bed. And my dad, well, I'll never forget this. I turned around, looked at my dad, and he's watched my whole move. You know, I said, "Hi, Dad." Walk in from school, book sack and everything. And my dad's sitting, and my dad liked his beer, you know, so he had his Schlitz beer on the table like that, and he just watched me just round the corner like that. And again, when I walked into my bedroom, I just froze, and the book sack just fell. And I turned around, he does, "There you are, I bought this for you." And I didn't know the first thing about this thing, but just sat there, he puts the picks on. He says, "Now listen," he strums it, and it's just this triad tuning, it's an open tuning. It made a chord. I'm like, I recognize that chord. And he said, "Yep, it's one position, here's another position, here. This is pretty much basically how our Cajun music, these are the 3 chords that you're gonna play for a long, long time." Didn't show me the picking, but then he gave me a couple of people to just listen to. And I went out and sought out these, back then, 45s and LPs, and I'd go to this camp where she first got her accordion thing at Ellis Trosclair's camp, and I'd spin this record on this stereo, time and time, kind of scratch it a little bit, put it back, just to emulate these sounds, and you know, that's how it came. And like Bo did with this fiddle, my steel picking back then, in 4 or 5 years, I was pretty much accomplished on the Cajun side of the music. But then I got bored. There was more music going through my head until I discovered the pedal steel guitar. And when I heard it first, I'm like, this is what I want to play. Because the pedal steel guitar goes in depth, and you tune it like a piano sort of. You have the scale. You can play notes, not just the triad. And then I was mentored by this man, Milton Gilbo, from back home, who was accomplished back then. And he just started teaching me how this is structured. I actually had to let the Cajun music go. I had to put it in the garbage because you got to think different. You can't let this chanky-chank sound get in the way of what you're trying to do with the pedal steel guitar. Well, then I found out about this school in Nashville that goes in depth and teaches what all these pedals and levers do within the tuning. So you take all this home, you don't learn it over there, you gotta take it home and spend thousands of hours to get your hands on all that. Well, lo and behold, it's 42 years later, I'm at the Library of Congress, go figure, you know?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because I think a lot of people outside of Louisiana, if they think about Cajun music, they'll certainly think about, accordion, and they'll think of fiddle, and they'll think of chanky-chank guitar, but they won't necessarily think of lap steel or pedal steel. But it was there.
It was.
Oh, yes.
It was prominent in the 60s, I guess,
and
and that's why.
in the Cajun dance halls and nightclubs when it began to emerge.
And I played back home with a group now called High Performance that had Steve Riley in the band. Everybody on the planet knows who Steve Riley is. But that mix of all our fathers played together at one time or another.
Yeah.
We're the second generation. So it's called High Performance, and it's called Cajun music on steroids because it's powerful. It's really good. So, but I'm playing pedal steel, not open. I can emulate the same tones.
But I will say, not too long ago, I dug up an old record. I don't know where it's at, and it was, you might have been 17 years old, playing on an open tuning,
Yes.
Maybe jambalaya. It was
Yes.
fast.
Yeah.
It was really fast.
Yeah, I
I'm not sure if it was all the way open. You may have had a pedal that brought it down to the floor.
No,
or something.
no.
It was hopping.
Just hopping.
You might have been 17 or something.
16.
Yeah, you were fast.
Yeah, anyway.
Amazing.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
time goes, don't it?
Yeah, it sure does. So Yvette, you mentioned that one of the people who played at Moulins while you were growing up was Dewey Balfa, right? And I know that you played with Balfa toujours.
Correct.
So tell us about that, about how that was sort of being in that second generation Balfa.
Well, let me tell you how I met Christine. She was living in Burbridge at the time, and I was at the Winn-Dixie in Burbridge checking out. And there was this girl standing in front of me, and you know, as we just like to talk to anybody, we don't care. So she's standing in front of me, and I said, "Huh?" And she turned around, she goes, "Oh, hi." And I said, "I'm Yvette, who are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm Christine. It's nice to meet you." And we're having this conversation, and I said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm a musician." And I said, "Oh," and I had just started playing music. So I said, "Oh, well, I'm starting to play music too." And I said, "What's your last name?" She said, "Balfa." And I said, "Oh, well, that's nice." I said, "Well, I'm playing with the Lafayette Rhythm Devils right now. I started playing about 3 months ago, and I'm, just, doing this." And she's there. "Oh, that's nice, that's nice, that's nice." Still have no clue who Dewey Balfa is, or the importance of Dewey Balfa, or who I'm talking to at this moment, So she said, "Oh, well, that's really nice." She said, "We're doing a benefit for my sister, and if you'd like to come and play bass guitar, that would be great." So I said, "Sure," it was right there in Burbridge. So that Sunday, I ended up going to play with Balfa toujours. Not a clue. I did not know who Balfa toujours was. So the next weekend, I'm talking to this little guy who started playing music the same time as I did. And he said, "So what'd you do this weekend?" I said, "Oh, I played with this band. What's their name? I think something like Balfa something." And he goes, "Balfa toujours, you play with Balfa toujours?" And I said, "Yeah." So that's when I realized maybe I should kind of go check and see who these people are. But no, it's incredible to play with Christine, and she basically channels her father in that music. And if you close your eyes, you could be in 2016, or you could be in 1956, or you could be in 18 whatever.
You're right.
So it's been an incredible journey, playing with him.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people outside Louisiana, Dewey Balfa would have been the first Cajun musician that they heard,
I think
because he
so.
started going to festivals in the
Right.
70s, and
Yeah.
that's,
You're right.
before that, nobody really knew what Cajun
Yeah.
music was outside Louisiana and parts of Texas.
Right, and he was a
So-
bus driver. I mean,
Right.
That's how people knew him as, basically.
Right.
A bus driver who played a little bit of music.
Yeah, but the other thing that I was always impressed with when talking to other musicians about Dewey Balfa particularly was the way he was just a mentor to so many people, and so many people learned from him. And so it's great that you got to play with Christine, and you get to play with Christine.
Yeah.
Because she was, sort of the best student, the main student,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So the group that you played with today had those Cajun influences, but also does a lot of what you call Louisiana honky tonk.
Mhm.
So explain those influences as well for us.
Well, it's kind of like I said earlier to the group. I was not going to be a musician, and I ended up going to a Cajun jam. Therefore, I play Cajun music. I still wonder if I would have gone to a blues jam if I'd have been a blues musician. I wasn't intending to be a musician. Same thing with writing songs. I didn't intend to be a songwriter, but when I did write my first song, it sort of came out with this country influence, and possibly because that's what I grew up listening to, I'm guessing. But when you add these guys to the mix, it's dance music, I think, more than anything else. I grew up as a dancer instead of a musician to that kind of music. So when I started writing songs, I wanted to be able to write songs that you could dance to. So we had that Cajun influence in terms of danceability to the song. But when you add the steel guitar, it kind of brings in that country genre. And then when Bo came into the band, the two of them just latched onto this. They sort of did it. The song really didn't have. It was in the making. It was creating. So when I just put it out there and let those two guys take off, it just kind of came with this little Texas swing thing. And then when my son came on the drums, he's got that. He's just it's natural. It's genetic in him, and he just. So it came to be this little Louisiana swing honky tonk with the Cajun something or other, and I don't know what it is. It just is.
Right. Well, you play some of your own songs, but you also play songs that you've gotten from elsewhere. You know, cover songs of various
Correct.
people.
Correct.
So what do you look for in a song? How do you find songs that you love?
I have to feel it. That's the best way to explain it. And my mom, she's all the time. She's always sending me a text. Oh, you should play this song. You should do this. You should do this. And I'll give it a try. And sometimes it'll, it's a good song, but I don't feel it. It's got to strike something inside of me. I don't know how else to explain it than that.
That's good. And in terms of writing songs, I mean, you do write a lot of the songs. How do things strike you as songworthy, as being something you're going to write a song about?
I don't really think I write the songs. I think I'm a vessel that the songs come through. There's not too many times where I've sat down and said, today I'm going to write a song. What happens is I'll be doing something, and then all of a sudden I'll say, I need to go get my guitar. And then before I know it, there's a song that comes through. So it might be something I noticed driving, or something I heard somebody say. I remember one time I was cooking supper for my son, and I was cooking a rice and gravy, and all of a sudden I had that feeling. I just had that feeling of something was going on in my head, and I said, I need to go get my guitar. So I went in my room and I started kind of doing this little melody that was there, and the words were coming, and I'm writing this song. And then the next thing I know, my fire alarm was going off. My house is full of smoke, and there's flames coming up, and I completely burnt the supper. But I had this song, and it was called "Memories of Clelia," and it was about a dad who was contemplating suicide because he lost his daughter and his wife. Now, I don't remember ever hearing about that or experiencing that or anything. So that's when I knew it just, that was something that I was just the vessel to come out of.
Right.
So, and like I said, I might be, the guy that I spoke with when I first started writing songs, he told me just pay attention. And I really did take those words to heart. And if you pay attention, there's a lot of stuff to write about. So
Right.
I think I notice things, and it kind of mulls over in my brain a little bit, and then when it's ready, it'll come out. That's how I do it.
Ooh, yeah, well, one of the ones that you sang today sort of sounded like that, because you said that you heard this phrase, "the house with no windows,"
Oh, yeah.
and you thought, oh, that's a good phrase, and then you wrote a whole song around
Absolutely,
that.
yeah.
So how did that song come together?
I was watching the documentary. It was like 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep, and I just thought that was the most amazing thing. Like a house with no windows. It's so vivid and visual, and I could see the imagery. And I don't know if you've listened to most of my songs. They're kind of I don't want to say they're man-hating songs, but there's a theme somewhere in there, And it was just weird. It's like I said, I didn't intend to sit down and write a song bashing, anybody, but it just came out.
Well, I mean, one of the great things about that song, I think, is that, you say, that one of your primary ways of writing songs is to pay attention. With that song, if you don't pay attention, if you just sort of let it play, it sounds like it's a sweet little love song.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have to be listening to the lyrics and know what is going on.
And sometimes before I sing it, I'll introduce it like that. I like to sing a little love song for you. But you have to be paying attention to really catch it.
Yeah, so you know this is what you're really talking about. That's great.
Yeah.
So that's sort of so your songwriting process is to just sort of notice stuff or have stuff come to you and then work on it, grab the guitar and.
Right, and like I said, and when the songs come, this is an amazing thing for me. I don't partially write a song and put it away and then come back to it or whatever. When they come, they just come, and within 10 to 20 minutes, I'll have a song and it's written.
Right.
And I may do a little bit of tweaking on it, but it,
I don't know.
So that's why I say I really don't feel that I'm writing the song. If that makes any sense.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
We get to the gig on Thursdays, we play. He says, T, I got a new song. And I'm setting up my stuff. I'm like, really? She says, we're gonna do it tonight. I said, what do you mean, you're gonna throw me under the bus?
Yeah.
I've never heard the dang thing.
Yeah.
She says, yeah, you're gonna, and she just plays it for me right there, so we're gonna map it out, then we play it.
Yeah.
It's great.
So that was sort of my next question was how do you guys then take, you know?
Just like I just said.
Just like
Gee, I
that.
got a new song.
It's like a FTD flowers arrangements while you wait. You know,
Right.
just put it all together.
Matter of fact, when we were doing sound check earlier, Bo had never heard that I had put a waltz and the new waltz that I wrote or that came out just a couple of days ago, and Bo had never heard it, and I said, okay, if we have time, we're going to do it today. So I just start playing it, and then they'll just. Matter of fact, on the plane, I told him on the plane, I
Yeah.
had recorded it on the voice memo, and so he was listening to it on the voice memo, and he goes, "What key is it in?" And I said, "It's in E." And then I could see him doing like this. He goes, "I'm learning it right now." So, yeah, so that's how.
All right. Well, I think each of you is in other bands as well. So why don't you tell me a little bit about the other musical groups that you play with?
Okay, so we do the trio, and then Richard and I do a duo, and then I have a full band, which is the Yvette Landry Band. We have a bass player, Joseph Butts, and my son Trevor on the drums. I'm also a member of the Lafayette Rhythm Devils. I play bass, and it's a Cajun band. I still play with Balfour Toujours occasionally, and I play bass in that band. Then I have a little trio called Les Ferrailles, which means brass knuckles, and I play guitar and a little bit of accordion in that band. And we also have a Les Ferrailles full band, which has a 5-piece band. So right now, and then I'm
And
just sort of
Bonsoir Catin as well. Is that still going? Or?
Bonsoir Catin is still going, but I haven't been with them for the last couple of years.
Oh, okay. So,
yeah, we got nominated for a Grammy, and then that was a good point for me to close the door and then just kind of move in a different direction. So that's what I did. And then I'm just a sort of bass player, guitar player, recording player for hire.
Yeah, it sounds like you have enough bands. With or without that one.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So what about you, Richard?
I, again, play with Yvette. Every Thursday we do this little duo, and we do this on occasion, the trio, that's like she said, and I played back home with this Cajun group I mentioned earlier, High Performance. And we do that on occasion. It's not a steady thing, although it's 2-3 times a month.
Yeah.
And we have a couple of local country artists back home that they're reputable in their own right, you know, Dustin Saunier, Blaine Roy, and I kind of mix that, and I have a day job as well, so I do that, and so plenty enough for me.
Yeah.
I did the big scene thing back in the 90s. I was lucky enough, got signed with a group to Capitol Nashville, River Road, and we did the whole big picture of the recording in Nashville back then, and traveled the country and parts of the world, and you know, and it just rode the wave, and then the wave has to come down, and then you go do something else. And right now, the something else is what I'm doing, and this is where I want to be. This
That's
is where I need to be. This is it. This is
Being home is sometimes good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know it. And Bo?
Awesome. I work with Yvette, of course, and I literally work for about 100 different artists on a regular basis. Do a little bit of a juggling act. A lot of Louisiana artists, do a lot of session work. Play with a lot of the same bands that Richard and I work together back at home. Cajun, country, jazz, blues. Do a lot of string arrangements and whatnot. I love to travel. Just, you know.
Somebody told me one time, man, we went down to your neck of the woods, and you guys have about 100 Cajun bands, but only like 12 musicians. Everybody just kind of floats around.
Right.
But he's the number one.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to session and just playing, he's the one everybody calls. He's the bomb. The bomb.
Same thing here with
The
the
bomb.
It's good to
yeah.
know, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
There's a lot of great musicians at home. So.
I have a question that maybe you can ask, which we were talking about earlier, which is just that, you know, Louisiana is known for Cajun and Zydeco, but there's so many other influences from other parts of the South. Just to talk about that, because you played a lot of different styles. Maybe to talk about the history.
Yeah, so that question was the fact that, you know, Cajun and Zydeco music are very well known as Louisiana music, but there's a lot of other musical influences throughout Louisiana, and talk about what some of the other southern musical styles are.
well, I can tell you, it's the blues.
Yeah.
big time.
Blues.
He has it, I have it, she has
Blues.
it,
And
but she mixes it in
It's,
all the
it's
music.
evident in that old string music, like the
Mhm.
Rustic Ramblers, and all this. A lot of the 1920s and 30s string music that was popular. You can still hear that trace back from the Dixieland, the jazz.
It's
the-
not playing the straight major, they play
No.
the seventh chord of the chord, and that's the blues. And it's in our playing, in her singing and everything.
That's right.
It's just a natural for us.
So there, I mean, there's that, but then, you know, just surrounding our little Acadiana area. So we have the Cajun, we have the Zydeco, we have the country, we have the blues. New Orleans is right down the road, so you've got the jazz, you know. We have more and more so people are coming in, so they're bringing old time music. We have, there's Irish music that's there.
There's German,
there's
a couple German communities,
you know,
Right.
there's a African community. There's a lot of influence from literally the melting pot.
Right, it's a melting pot. And
Yep.
so all of that music from way back when will find its way, even if it's just a tiny bit, but it'll find its way in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that accordion wasn't American originally or
No.
African, so yeah.
No,
No.
no, that's the
one of
Germans that
yeah.
Yep,
brought that.
Germans.
That's the Germans that
Yep.
brought that, right. And the reason why the Cajuns loved it so much is because it was so obnoxiously loud. And so for the dance halls, at first when they just had the fiddles playing, it was great music, and the French music that originally came down was fiddle music, but it didn't work well in the dance halls because there was no amplification. And so when that accordion came, that was it.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
So speaking of being able to hear and maybe not being able to hear, one of the things that I think was really interesting in the concert was when Richard started playing the Star Spangled Banner, you started to sign it.
Yeah.
So tell us about ASL and your connection there.
Well, that was a spur of the moment decision to do that. But I do teach American Sign Language at University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And people always ask, do you have any hearing impaired people, any people who are deaf in your family? And the answer is no. I learned sign language because I was challenged. As I'm a school teacher as well, and I started teaching self-contained special needs students, and I learned I was trying to teach them to read, and so I learned about 100 signs, and I switched schools, and the new school actually had a deaf ed program. And so the first day of school, I'm walking on campus, and there's these two little boys that are walking down the sidewalk, and they're signing. And I got all excited because I knew how to say good morning. So I walked up to them, and I signed good morning. And they stopped, and they looked at me. They gave me this look like, who are you? We know everybody that signs. We don't know who you are. So this one kid started just like signing 90 miles an hour, and I just did, stop, I don't understand. And he gave me this look, and he stormed off, and he marched away. And I looked at the other little boy, and I did, what? And the little kid goes, like this. So I'm watching the other kid, and he goes and he grabs his interpreter, and he's dragging his interpreter back, and he stands up in front of me, and he's just, hands flying everywhere, and the interpreter is voicing for him, and she's saying, who do you think you are? Are you making fun of me? Do you want to talk to me? If you want to talk to me, why don't you learn how to talk to me? I mean, this little kid chewed me out.
He was not out of it.
First day of school, I was horrified. I was so heartbroken. And he said, his last words to me was, if you want to talk to me, why don't you learn how to talk to me? And he turned around and he just stormed off. So I taught that day, and I was just miserable. And I went home, and I'll never forget this. I was washing the dishes, and I'm just kind of looking out of the window, replaying the whole thing in my head. And then all of a sudden I said, wait a minute. I told 400 other kids on campus good morning, and I didn't have a conversation with them. Why do I need to talk to that kid? Why do I need to learn how to talk? Who does he think he is? So I went to school the next day, and I found the interpreter, and I said, where's that little boy? And she said, he's over there. I said, go get him. So she went and she grabbed him and she brought him back, and he's standing in front of me, all attitude like that. And I looked at her and I said, I want you to sign word for word what I'm telling him. And so she said, okay. So I bent down and I said, listen here, you little turd. Let me tell you something. I said, I came on campus and I told 400 other people good morning and didn't have a conversation with them. So there's no reason why I need to have a conversation with you. But I tell you what, I will learn how to talk to you. And when I do learn how to talk to you, I'm going to chew your butt out just like you chewed mine out. And I turned around and I stormed off and I went straight to the teacher's lounge and I looked in the phone book and I found deaf services and I called them and I said, do y'all teach sign language classes? And they said, yes ma'am, we do. I said, when do you start? She said, well, we actually have the session starting next week. I said, good, sign me up because you have till May 15th to teach me how to chew somebody out. And so,
That's a good story.
yeah, so that's how I started with sign language. And I went to the classes and then I just sort of immersed myself in the culture and I fell in love with the language and the culture and, you know, so I learned it and I did and I chewed him out in May and the whole time I was doing it, he was just looking at me like that and so I was all proud of myself when I finished, you know, like there, and he looked at me and he just went, see, now you can talk to me. And I was there, you little turd, you got the last word in anyway.
Right.
You know? But I'm so thankful that he did that
Yeah.
because, you know, I've enjoyed it now for quite some time.
Well, Washington D.C. really appreciates that. There's a lot of deaf education
Yes.
here, and so people really,
Yes.
you know, see hearing impaired people on all the time. They do appreciate the signing, so that was really nice. The other sort of non-musical thing that I think we should talk about is your books, because you've written a couple of books which are based around folklore.
Yes.
And since we are the American Folklife Center, that's another thing that we're interested in. So give us the rundown on your books.
So much. So yes, I've written 2 books, and I've told this story twice already, but I'll tell it again. So I never intended to be a musician, and then here I am.
Right.
I never intended to be a songwriter, and here I am. And I definitely never intended to be an author, yet here I am. And the first book came about from actually a musical gig. I was offered to go play in Maine. This gentleman said, you know, we have this guitar, what did he call it? A guitar society that does concerts, and we usually have virtuoso guitar players come, and you're obviously not a virtuoso guitar player, but I think you have something to offer, so maybe we could ask you to come. And I'm thinking, why would I even go? You know? But then I thought, you know what? If you're crazy enough to ask me, I'm gonna go, and I'm gonna do this. So I ended up going by myself, which was my first solo gig, and I was so nervous. And he picked me up at the airport with his 2 children who were 3 and 5 years old. And they came to the airport and they're running around like crazy, you know, and then they're, hey Asian lady, are you coming to my house? Hey Asian lady, are you gonna do this? Are you gonna do this? And I remember looking at the dad going, why are your children calling me Asian? And he said, well, I've told them now for a month that the Cajun lady was coming, but they don't really know what Cajun is, so they just assume that you're Asian. So we rode back and we got to their house, and like I said, they were just 3 and 5 and full of energy. And I get out of the car and I have my guitar and I have my gig bag and I have my suitcase, and they're running around and they're like, are you gonna play ball with me? Are you gonna run? Blah, 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 like doing all this stuff, and I'm there, wow. And the youngest one, when I turned, he wanted me to watch him ride his bike. And when I turned, he had taken off all of his clothes. And he had put on his dad's rollerblades, which were like this big, and he's on this bike, and he's riding all around the yard, and he's like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I'm thinking, you know, the other one has tennis balls, and he's throwing them at my head, and I'm there, what am I doing here? And all of a sudden, the little one gets off of his bike, kicks off the rollerblades, and starts running around the yard, and then all of a sudden, he just, like, he freezes. And I hear this woman yell from the window, oh my God, Levi, do you have to go to the potty? And this little kid who was frozen, he just looks at his mom and he goes, So she comes running out of the house. So we almost knocked me off of the sidewalk, and she picks up this kid and she flings him over, and he's kicking and screaming, and he's like, I'm not going, I'm not going, I'm not going. And she's there, but you have to go, you have to go. And then all of a sudden, he stiffens up like this, and he screams at the top of his lungs. He goes, I'm not going unless the Asian lady comes. everything, and we run in the house, and we get into, she just opens the door to this little bathroom, I mean, tiny, and she puts the little kid on the little puchon on the potty right there, and then the 5-year-old comes under the sink, and he sits under the sink, and she just kind of shoves me in, and I'm sort of squeezing between the toilet and the wall, and she goes, "Thank you," and she closes the door. So I'm sitting in this bathroom with these kids, and they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and I'm going, what the heck am I doing? And so the little one, he's sitting on the potty, and he just does like that, and he goes, "Asian lady, tell me a story about Asian land." And it was in that moment that I made up a story about the ghost tree based on a tree that we have back at home. We have the second largest live oak in the state of Louisiana at my grandmother's house. So I made up this story about this live oak tree that on October 31st, if you go into the swamp and you look at it, it will come to life, and it'll grow eyes, and its mouth will open up, and snakes will come out, and it'll turn you into stone, and it'll eat you. And so it was a very successful story, I might add. And in the process, it ended up being a very wonderful weekend, and I wrote the story down to send to them, and one thing led to another. Somebody read it. Within a week, I had an illustrator, a publisher, and a book deal, and there it was.
All right.
So that's how that came to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second one, I intentionally wrote a children's book.
Right.
So yeah, and that one's coming out at the end of this month, and it's called Madame Grandois. And my grandmother used to tell me stories about her. If you were not behaving, she lived up in the attic in the rafters, and at night her long fingers would come down and snatch you up, and you would never be seen again.
Right.
Yeah. Happy little children's stories.
Yeah, well, sometimes those can be useful in
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
potty situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So we want to thank you for bringing copies of those books here to the Library of Congress. So now they've been added to our collections, and we're really happy about that. So tonight you were going to play at the Kennedy Center as well. So
Yes.
so more music. Is there anything more that you folks wanted to say about your music?
Actually, Richard, why don't you talk a little bit about the fact that just about when you were coming up, there were a few other people your age studying pedal steel, and now
Okay.
it's that.
What I want to say is that when I began playing steel guitar, I was 13. And back then, I have 3 other friends about the same age as I, 2 or 3 years difference, that we all started playing the steel guitar at the same time. And we've all, mentored, and we've all woodshedded together. We've been same training, a lot of get-togethers and sharing ideas and licks and whatever you want to call them. And it's 40 years past, and it's scary because there's nobody coming up behind us. And I've actually I have another steel guitar. I have a couple of them. I've loaned one to a young guy coming up, and I don't know if he's getting it or not. I don't know. It's just scary. It's scary that nobody is coming up. Now they attempted and spent thousands of dollars, and they do what a lot of other people do: get discouraged and put the dang thing under the bed, and it rots there. So it's an instrument that you gotta fall in love with. The like I did right out the gate. I went to bed. I remember with that thing right next to my bed, and I looked at it like, I am going to learn this thing. But you have to marry it, and you have to be willing to sacrifice, and because it doesn't come easy. It's the hands, the feet, or the legs. It doesn't come easy. So, but if you work hard, it's a shame it takes this long.
Mm-hmm.
But you can reap some of the rewards. But what we talked about, it's scary that I have a son that's a great guitar player. Set the thing up in this room, showed him a few things. He tried. He's just like, Dad, I just can't do it. Now, he's an amazing guitar player, but he's just not going to attempt the steel guitar. And there's a lot of others that just afraid to do it.
Do you think it's just because it's so hard, or?
Too much work for me. That's it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm way
I
too
don't know.
lazy.
It took me 30 minutes to figure out how to put the pizza
I
on.
left it at her house, tell the story about me leaving it at your house
He
one
left it
day.
at my house one day, so I called him and I said, T, I said, you think I could kind of mess around with it a little bit? And he said, oh yeah, sure. So I sat there, I'm not kidding you, for 30 minutes trying to figure out how to put the picks on. I'd put them on one way and I'd try,
They
and
fly off.
it just didn't
See,
work.
you don't put them this way, you put them
It was weird.
going straight up.
Put them
90
sideways. I
degree
tried
angle,
everything.
'cause
None of
you
them
pick
felt
like
right.
this.
So I called my friend in New York who plays steel guitar, and I said, Thomas, I said, I have this steel guitar in my living room, and I said, I don't know what to do with it. And he goes, okay, Yvette, listen to me. This is very serious. I need you to pay very close attention. I said, okay. He said, I need you to take the guitar, and I need you to go put it out in the yard. And I'm thinking, well, is it, okay. He goes, and then he said, go in the garage and get a gas can and pour gas all over it and light the match and run as fast as you can. He said, stay away from that thing.
Yeah, don't go there.
Don't go there. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's, I mean, you gotta be an octopus to play that thing. It's just, you get too many things to do, yeah.
So,
But hopefully somebody will come around back home and kind of take off from where we, leave it.
Yeah.
I hope.
Because when you hear steel guitar in a Cajun song, it's a totally different beast than if you just have fiddle,
right.
So it brings a whole new,
In which I wanted to interrupt a while ago. You talked about Dewey Balfour, how he's been like the guy that brought Cajun music all over the world, and he has. But believe it or not, there are two styles of
Right.
Cajun music. His style is what went across the country. My style isn't. We call their style the prairie type of Cajun music, whereas we like known as the Lafayette style of music. It's a different rhythm, totally different. And believe it or not, the steel guitar, where I come from, drives the music along with the fiddle together. It's that power-driven thing that we do, they don't do.
and it's a lot like the language as well, because the language from the Prairie Cajuns, which is only about an hour away,
Not even. It's about 40.
45
Yeah.
minutes, is completely different than the French that we speak down, or that some people speak down our way.
Yeah, I think most people would notice that the music swings kind of differently. That would be sort of their way of feeling
does.
that difference. Yeah.
But Steve Riley is from the prairie side.
Right.
But he's also
But he-
part
yeah.
of the mix of the high performance.
Yeah.
And he's probably, to me, the best accordion player on the planet, That's,
All right.
who I think is the bomb.
We love
although,
Steve, yeah.
Although we have a young guy in the group that plays with more energy with the Lafayette style, that's incredible. But I'm talking for the pocket, the timing. Steve Riley to me is like the bomb, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, we love Steve, and his band members have been here doing
Oh,
research
yeah.
and stuff. So we.
Well, it's Kevin the drummer.
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
Kevin's dad that got me my first gig.
Oh, all right.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Was Kevin's dad in the original Mambo Playboys before? One of their dads was in that original band that they're named after, but I can't.
That
remember.
was Mr. Lawrence Berzard, which was
Oh, the Berzard.
Kevin
Yeah, yeah.
Berzard's father.
Okay,
yeah.
His original
Okay.
guitar
Yeah,
player,
yeah.
Steve's original.
Yeah.
I believe
So, sounds right. All right. Well, I'm really glad that we've been able to talk about all these things, and I think that talking about the pedal steel is really fascinating because it is that instrument that you guys have at the center of your sound that I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily expect as much in a Cajun band because of what you said, that the style that took off was a different side of Cajun music. But it's such a beautiful sound, and
Thank
it
you.
adds that real sadness and heart to the music that I think is terrific. So thank you so much for bringing your Cajun music and Louisiana honky tonk.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.